Hello, in this video I will be giving an in-depth look at the Voron Vzero printer. This printer was recently announced on the most recent Voron Live episode, and in there we did go over the printer itself. However, it was a live stream, so in this one I will be covering it in a little bit more in-depth and higher quality and giving you a better, closer look at the printer and its current state. So the Voron Vzero is a Core XY printer, like all other Vorons. It has a fixed gantry. The bed is cantilevered and rides on two MGN7s and is lead screw driven. The motion is Core XY, has NEMA 14 motors, and also rides on MGN7 rails. Uses 6mm 2GT belt for the drive. The printer itself is 230 by 230 by 280 millimeters tall. Weighs approximately 10 pounds. So the print volume is 120 by 120 and 120 millimeters. It does have a energetic flex plate for the print surface. It is a Mic 6 aluminum bed cast tooling plate. It is 3-point mounted with adjustable screws for adjusting the leveling. There is no bed mesh or nozzle probe or inductive probe in this printer. There simply is no room for it in its current revision. It's not something we're looking at. With a print bed this small, once you manually level it, and especially with the flex plate, you're not going to be smashing the bed around or chiseling parts off or anything. So once it's leveled, it really shouldn't move. I've leveled this a few months ago. I tweaked it once after a couple of prints, and then I haven't touched it since, and it's still holding level, and I flipped this printer around. I've worked on it. Nothing has moved. This is a very solid bed. The frame of the printer is 1515 aluminum extrusions. On this one, I actually have a mix of open beam, maker beam, and Mizumi 1515. All three of those will work. The Chinese 15 profile, at this point, we're going to say don't even look at it. The way the profile is on them doesn't quite match up. Don't look at Chinese 1515 at this time. We don't think it'll work with the current design of the printer. So you're going to have to look at either Mizumi, Open Beam, or Maker Beam. The Maker Beam XL comes in 200mm pre-cut sizes, which is exactly what you need, and they come pre-tapped. So that is what we currently recommend for looking for your frame. The rails are MGN 7s again. I got mine on AliExpress from CNA. Yeah, they work fine. I think I got one extra, and I just went through and looked for the best ones I needed, and all of them were pretty much the same. So as I said, the motors are NEMA 14s. Now we actually went through and tested this out with multiple different motors. So for the NEMA 14s, we did try out multiple different sizes of motors for the different applications, AB drive, Z, extruder. And in the end, we're actually just settling on this style of motor all around. These ones, they're slightly smaller. We had issues with skipping steps. We tried a smaller one for the extruder. It ended up getting too hot. NEMA 14s are a lot pickier to be happy than NEMA 17s we found. So you really have to spec the correct motor. So we really recommend getting the spec motors for this printer. From the back here, you can kind of see how some of the electronics are done. This is a pretty small printer, so there's really not a lot of room in here. This cable right here is just the ribbon cable for the webcam for Raspberry Pi. I don't have it hooked up, so it's just kind of tucked away. So looking at the back here, I have a Raspberry Pi 3, and actually mounted underneath it is a buck converter that provides the 5 volts for it. I also have another buck converter here simply because I'm running 12 volt fans instead of 24 volts. Everything else in here is 24 volts. And also on the back here, you can see the extruder. Now the extruder on the Vzero, we call it the Pocket Watch. It's basically a scaled down version of the extruder in the Voron V2. So it's the guts of a BMG Bondtech extruder rehoused in a printed housing with a NEMA 14 motor this time around. The reason for that is we don't really have a lot of room. As you can see, it just fits inside the outer perimeter. This whole printer is designed so that you can panel all the walls so nothing sticks out. Now, of course, this doesn't stop you from, you know, slapping a Mobius on the side if you want to. And also on the backslash side of mine, this is where my inlet is. This is one of those, you know, you see them everywhere, inlet with a fuse and a rocker power switch. We don't know if this will be like something like the final setup, but this is how mine currently is. Again, this is a pre-release test one. This one is a couple months old at this point, and so stuff's been tweaked around since this one has been built. Now on the bottom, you can see we have a controller board. That's the SKR Mini E3 version 1.2. That's the one I use. Really, you can use any controller board that you can fit on this thing, even a ramps. People have talked into looking into using a Duet. The bigger SKR does just barely fit in here if you want to go with that. Really, any controller board will work. We're just using the Mini because it's 32-bit. It comes with 2209s built in. It's cheap and it has everything we need for this printer. The power supply, it is running a mains bed. So the power supply is only an LRS 124. Provides all the power you need. It's small, it's compact, it's good quality. And this little guy right here strapped to the side of the power supply is actually a small Crydom SSR, and this is the SSR that controls the mains bed. The mains bed is a 100 by 100, I believe, Kinovo silicone heating mat attached to the bottom of the bed, and it's 100 watts. Moving on to the hot end, the Voron Vzero accepts the V6, Mosquito, or Dragon hot end. For the V6, it does have to be the thread mounted version, not the groove mount. There's simply not enough room in the tool head for a groove mount. On this one right here, I do have a V6 currently. I am waiting on a Dragon to come in. I will be swapping it over. The reason for that is I simply want to be able to do toolless nozzle changes on my little printer here, and a Dragon will allow that. For cooling, the hot end fan is a 30 by 30 by 10 millimeter, and the two part cooling fans are 30 by 30 by 10 millimeter blower fans. They're basically smaller versions of the style of fan that we use in the V2.2. So these are a proven design. It does work, and I have had zero issues with part cooling with this printer. And looking here, you can see that the tool head itself is much smaller and more compact than the V2.2 or current Afterburner tool head. This is a much smaller printer. There's less electronics in the head. Here you can see this is where your X end stop is, your Y end stop is mounted there, and the Z end stop is mounted right back there, and there is a screw for adjusting your Z offset if you wish to do it that way. All the end stops are simple KW10 micro switches, nice and cheap, and they work perfectly. They're about 10 cents each on AliExpress. For idlers, most of the idlers in this printer are just a stack of F623 bearings. We do have two locations where we do have tooth idlers in this printer. These ones are from Pouch. I've been running this for a few months now. I haven't noticed any issues with the bearings exploding. That was common on some of the cheaper ones. So far these are holding up just fine. We haven't had any issues. And then in the back here, you can see we do have some cable chain here. This is 7mm cable chain. This is simply for running the wires from the heater down into the bottom compartment. Now, for these two plates here, you are going to need a bottom plate because of mounting electronics. This rear plate here is technically optional, but we do recommend it. Just gives you a lot more work to mount, cable management, and items behind the printer. And this is actually how I mounted the electronics underneath. So this is an ABS sheet. It does fit in the slot here. So as you're building the frame up, you're going to slot this sheet in here. You're going to drill some holes, and I use nylon standoffs, which are basically nylon versions of the same ones you will see for like mounting a motherboard. And they simply screw through, and then they mount to the electronics under here. So this is how everything is. There's no printed mounts for anything under here. On the back, though, we do have printed mounts for the Raspberry Pi, and then this stuff is just held on with VHP tape and zip ties. So there is, while this is a small printer, there is plenty of room to do proper cable management. Again, this is just for a webcam. Currently working on a solution for mounting that. So one thing you will notice with this printer is we currently don't have a screen mounted on it. We are currently looking at a few different options, but as you can see, with a printer this small, screens will take up a lot of room, either stick out past the current frame, or we'll have to figure out some way of mounting them within, but then you also have a door here. So currently I do run this printer headless. With Clipper, that's not really an issue. I have a laptop in the room here. So it's not really a huge issue running this headless currently, but we are looking into options for having a screen. For the enclosure, as you can see, I currently do have panels on the side. I don't have the front door on because I need to go out and get more plexiglass. But for the hat, there are a few different versions of the hat. This one is fully printed, and this will fit on a Voron V2 250mm bed. And this is printed one piece. I printed this quick at high layer height, so it doesn't really look too great, but it does work functionally. And the panels are just cut with scoring and snapping style. So these are just cheap acrylic panels, actually. So this is one version of the hat. There is another version that uses extrusions if you want a more square, professional, cleaner look. This one is, simple because you can just print it. And then the front will have a door that hinges out. So for enclosing this, you can fully enclose this printer, no problem. It is designed to be enclosed, and you can print ABS on this, no issues. I have printed ABS. I just simply threw a bag over it. It worked just fine. As for print quality, it's Voron, so it's going to print great. Here's some simple examples I have. These are just simple PLA prints that I've run off this machine. Print speeds, you're looking at, standard Voron print speeds, 250 to 300 millimeters a second travel. All these prints were done at what I consider normal Voron speeds. So 60 millimeters a second outer layer, 90 millimeters a second inner layer, 120 millimeters a second infill, 250 to 300 millimeters a second travel. I am running accelerations depending on if it's an inner layer, outer layer, or travel up to, I believe, 3,600 millimeters a second. We still are playing around with what we will consider, good, solid numbers that work. But this printer can outrun the hot end. So you can print faster than the hot end can melt plastic if you're using, a 0.4 millimeter nozzle with 0.2 layer heights, So for this printer, I'm very happy with it. Since I got it up, the point of me building it was basically to have a small backup printer, one that I can, if we're designing and working on part changes or something, and you just want to print one small part, you don't want to heat up a big printer, or it's currently, you're running a 20-hour plate on here and you don't want to wait for that to finish before you run off a few small parts. This is perfect for that. It's also a great, backup printer. If something happens with your main printer, it goes down, you can print a replacement part. This bed right here is big enough to print any part required to build a Voron V2, a V1, or a V0. So you literally can build this whole printer using this little guy if you want. And for cost, the current bill of materials is sitting around roughly $400 USD. You probably could do it a little bit cheaper if you really look into where you're sourcing parts. If you don't feel like waiting for the slow boat from China, especially with current events, you will be spending a little bit more if you get stuff off Amazon. Now again, this is the printer as it is right now. This one is over a month old. We have done some tweaks to them. We're still finalizing what will be considered standard electronic wise. But the one thing I really like about this printer, it's a great tinker printer. So if you already have, a workhorse printer, or you just want something small that you can just, mess around with, this will be great for you. Do you want to run a duet with a power brick in a DC bed? Go ahead. If you want to run, that old ramps that you got kicking around, you tore apart a printer from a few years back, you got an old bed that's the right size and it'll fit in here, go ahead. This printer will be great for playing around with what you want to try without investing the amount of money to try stuff on, say, a Voron V2. This is a much bigger printer. It's much more complicated. If you want to try something, you're going to need, more parts. This little guy here, you want to try a different controller, you spend $30 on the controller, you throw it in. If it works, it works. If it don't, well, you're only out $30. So this will be a fun printer I foresee to play around with. I expect to see lots of customizations to this printer. We've already have a folder that the devs have of modified parts and tweaks and our own little way of how we're doing things. With something this small, it's really a toy. It is fun to play with. So I hope you do enjoy this little overview of the printer. This was a little bit more in-depth, hopefully a little bit better quality than the live stream. Simply, I know we had some bitrate issues there, so people wanted to see some higher quality up-close looks of the printer. If you do have any questions, feel free to ask them below. As of right now, of course, the files and the BOM aren't out yet. When those do come out, I will link them below in the description. Thank you, and have a great day.